is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. Chapters 18, 19, 20, and 21. Or no, 18, 19, 20. That's it. In these chapters, man, there is a lot of hope in this story considering everything. I'm constantly shocked by it. And yet, I just am so bummed out by how alert and constantly watchful everyone has to be. And it's really, tiring. But I'm really enjoying this story. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. This episode is brought to you by Denise Atwood. Some of you may remember a little while back that Denise sponsored another episode of Parable because what she did was she bought 3 episodes worth and told me that I was allowed to read anything that I wanted to read. And that, she wasn't commissioning anything specific. She just was commissioning in order to support me. And that I should use those credits towards something that I wanted more coverage of. So I have decided to use all of them for Parable because I'm fascinated by this book. And it's the one that's had the most intermittent support so far. So yeah, I just really wanted to find out what happens next. And I had to sort of wait to fit in the episodes that she had commissioned with the blank check on a day that I didn't have a bunch of other commissions. And every single day since things started to really pick up, I've been completely booked every day. And this was the first day that I had no commissions whatsoever. So I decided that I'm going to do both today. And I am going to be recording this one and then ending it, reading the next 50 pages, and then recording another one at noon. So stay tuned because that's going to be happening. And I'm pretty excited about it because I feel like Parable is it's such a different narrative than a lot of the other books that I'm covering, where there's a very specific expectation as to what's going to happen and a really well established, I don't want to say scenario, probably just setting. Everything is set in a specific area that you grow familiar with and you sort of feel like you know what to expect. And because Parable is like an on-the-road story, there's no growing comfortable with where you are. And there's no feeling like you're familiarized with all of the potential for that area, because everything is so unstable in this book that moving just a few miles completely changes your situation and how comfortable you are and how safe you are. So in something, for example, like the 5th season, where there is a character who is also on the road, that's sort of balanced out by other characters who stay in one place or who at least have a base camp that they're eventually going to return to. And in this, it's a very different feeling because they're not just taking a long trip and going home eventually. They don't have anywhere to go. And they have no better idea than you or I what awaits them when they get where they're going, because everybody in the world seems to be heading in the same direction as them. So it's 10-1 whether they find what they want in the end. And you're just sort of in the same situation as a reader where you're kind of trying to keep yourself calm because you have no idea if this is going to end in just heartbreak, in people finally reaching where they've been heading this whole time, where they've been believing that there's hope and maybe a new start. And perhaps that area is going to be completely overrun and not actually viable anymore. Which, is a valid ending, to be honest. It's not like I don't feel like it would be necessarily satisfying, but it certainly wouldn't be untrue. And so there's something about this book that really makes me want to continue coverage in a way that the others don't, because I feel like I'm still trying to get my feet under me. And that's the point, right? I feel like the point is that you're feeling the way the characters are, and they're trying to get their feet under them. This is not something that they are. None of them have experienced just living on the road as a permanent situation. Everybody that they wind up meeting and taking on to their like little crew, all of these people are folks who have used to have a home. And this is the first time that they're really having to, except for one who then had a home after not as a child. So I feel like it's actually pretty effective writing in that you really feel what the characters are feeling. And yeah, I just really have been wanting to get further into the story because, like I said, the commissions have been a little bit inconsistent. And when there's a lot of lag time, and I'm not blaming the commissioner for this at all because I understand, but when there's a good amount of lag time between covering chapters, you start to lose a little bit of the atmosphere that you had when you were reading it the first time, and you have to work to get that back when you start again. And, you know, obviously just refresh yourself with who the characters are and stuff like that. So I'm excited to be able to do 2 in one day and get a little bit, what's the word? More of a foothold, maybe. We'll see. So chapter 18 starts off with Travis talking to Lauren about Earthseed. And Travis is the father of the little boy and the husband of the woman that they wound up teaming up with from the beach. Travis is actually a pretty, like, he is an open-minded person who teases her a little bit about Earthseed, but it turns out that he seems to really buy it after a while. Like, I was worried that him pushing her and asking her a lot of questions meant that he was going to be giving her a hard time and that she was going to constantly need to be on the defensive with this. And as it turns out, no, he is asking her questions and he tries to tease her, I think, in order to lighten, because I think he doesn't want her to think that he's taking it too seriously, even though he kind of is. I think he doesn't want to give her the satisfaction of, you know, behaving as if this invented religion is credible. And honestly, as somebody who can be perversely contrary, I really do understand that mindset, even though it's incredibly childish in a lot of ways. Like, there's something about, like, giving people satisfaction that I don't feel they have earned that I rail against so badly. And I'm not sure where that comes from, but, like, you know, if somebody, you know, the kind of like passive aggressive thing where somebody sort of is like, wow, this isn't as bad as the last time I was here. And it's the sort of leading statement where you can feel that they want you to ask, why? What happened the last time you were here? I am the person who doesn't ask what happened the last time. Because to me, if you want me to know, tell me the story. Be like, wow, God, this is different. Last time I was here, blank, 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 blank. But no, you have to like do this weird thing where I pull the fucking story out of you. And I don't know why that kind of thing irritates me so bad, but I don't participate. So this thing where he's like talking to her, but when it starts to get too serious, or when he thinks that she's like believing she has him, he sort of turns it into a joke. It resonated with me a lot, especially when it comes to talking about something as nebulous as religion and as kind of loaded as faith, because they are living in a world where having hope and faith isn't necessarily like helpful. So I don't know. I just found it interesting the way that their interactions work. And I was pleasantly surprised that he was as willing to hear her and sort of absorb what he's like. He's clearly thinking over what she's saying on his own time. and then coming back at her with questions after he's given things some thought himself, rather than just trying to be antagonistic and poke holes in what she's saying. It doesn't feel like his questions are meant to be kind of, confrontational. It feels like his questions are real questions that he has, things that he's thought over and couldn't find an answer to himself. And now he's asking her to expand on her idea. So good on you, Travis. And I appreciate that. And it's also helpful for me because I found that the conversations that she has with him, and I think she has, I can't remember, I think it's with Harry later, both actually enlightened me a little bit as to what it is that she's thinking. Because I don't always completely understand the Earthseed concept myself. It's been a really background sort of thing, like it's forefront in her mind, and it starts off each chapter with like a different verse of it, but the verses are really, really esoteric. It's one thing to be able to understand a concept that she's presenting in a little excerpt, and it's another to really feel like you get the whole like the underlying belief and goal and idea behind the religion itself. So he's questioning her about this stuff. And when he's asking her, they're actually camping out for a full day at this beach. They decided that they needed a rest day. So they found somewhere that wasn't too public and hunkered down and took the entire day off. Which I like, because I feel like it's really tempting in stories like this to have people just continue walking endlessly, and it's not realistic as much as like you wish that you could do that and just make up that time. Especially if in the situation that they are in, it's not like they have, like $200 shoes from the walking company. They're wearing whatever they can find, whatever they can scavenge, whatever they can buy for the, little money they have. And also they're carrying packs, and also they're under constant stress as they travel, which is a whole other kind of toll on your body. And it's not as if being camped takes that stress away, because they still need to, but it's much easier to relax because you can just set somebody up to watch and guard. And I'm just really curious, like in my mind, being put on to watch is the most boring thing I can think of. And I really don't know if I would be good at that job. I was thinking about it the other day. Like they set somebody to watch at night while everyone else is asleep. They set somebody to watch during the day while they're all resting and, washing their clothes and trying to kind of regroup. And this is not somewhere where you have your headphones on and you can chill listening to an audiobook while you stare out and make sure that nobody's coming. You are doing nothing. You're doing nothing. You're just staring and watching and listening. Oh my God, that's boring. I really don't I feel like I'd be bad at this job. I feel like I'd be the one who let down the whole crew by falling asleep. But yeah, she talks about how the two couples took turns disappearing while I watched their packs and the baby. Interesting that the Douglases were already comfortable trusting me with all that was precious to them. We didn't trust them to watch alone last night or the night before, though we did make them watch. We had no walls to put our backs against, so it was useful to have two watchers at a time. Natividad watched with me, and Travis watched with Harry, and finally Zara watched alone. In that case, when you're watching with somebody else, you can talk. I mean, probably not a good idea to really talk because that'll distract you, and you won't be able to listen as well. But you're not totally alone, so I feel like I could deal with that. But she is just really surprised, Lauren is, at how much they decided to trust her right away. And it's convenient, they're able to sort of finally let things go, and it's a lot easier to plan stuff when folks aren't worried about leaving anything with you. But I thought that was pretty remarkable also. And I'm not sure if that speaks to how much of an air she gives off or her crew gives off of being trustworthy, and how much it's about this couple not really being savvy. But, let's see. There were locals at this beach, people who had left real homes to spend an August day at the beach. I'm trying to make sure that I've started in the right place here. Okay, yeah. And when she goes and talks to these folks and is asking them where they should go, there is a real consensus here that things are getting worse on the coast and that moving inland is much more advantageous. And I was really bummed out, actually. And, I'm going to look back here. Sorry, guys. I'm just making sure because I feel like I started this further back, but no, I'm in the right place. It's just like they keep sort of like stopping and building camp and meeting new people briefly and then stopping and build. And so I'm like, did I really start this section at chapter 18 or was it earlier? But I'm pretty sure it's chapter 18 because I remember them being trusting of her as like the start of this reading section. But this part where she's talking about the locals, they say something about how all of the stuff that happens with the people who get high and then burn things has originated in LA, where most stupid or wicked things began. Local prejudice, which I could swear happens later in this section. And I don't know if that's again, or if I'm just misremembering. Some people said they knew where I could work to earn a meal or a safe place to sleep, but no one knew where I could earn money. That didn't mean there weren't any such jobs, but if there were, they would be hard to find and harder to qualify for. That's going to be a problem wherever we go. And yet we know a lot, the three of us, the five of us. We know how to do a great many things. There must be a way to put it all together and make something other than domestic servants working for room and board. We make an interesting unit. And then she talks about how they go to another water station because they passed some dudes who had clearly died vomiting blood and had their canteens right next to them. So obviously, whoever they got their water from, it was not a clean source. And that's really terrifying. I just tried to imagine what could cause something like that. And I really don't know, if it's a chemical thing, if it's like a bacterial thing. But yikes. I mean, I would imagine if it's a bacterial thing that most people seem to have the salination tablets and that takes care of it. But I don't think if it's a chemical thing, they'd be able to do anything. So it's probably that. And it was corrosive or something. So yeah, they continue walking and finally get to a store called Hanning Joss. It's sort of dropped into this sentence as if it's a chain store. We all resupplied yesterday at a local Hanning Joss. So I don't know if that's a chain store that exists now. And I'm not familiar with it because it's like a California chain. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting little tidbit that adds to the feeling of this being a world that most people are somewhat familiar with still, that this is not a completely fallen apart world. It's just mostly fallen apart. That this is a chain place that's still operating. We were relieved and surprised to see it. A good, dependable place where we could buy all we needed from solid food for the baby to soap to salves for skin chafed by salt water, sun, and walking. Natividad bought new liners for her baby carrier and washed and dried a plastic bag of filthy old ones. Zara went with her into the separate laundry area of the store to wash and dry some of our filthy clothing. We wore our sea-washed clothing, salty but not quite stinking. Paying to wash clothes was a luxury we could not often afford, yet none of us found it easy to be filthy. We weren't used to it. We were all hoping for cheaper water in the north. I even bought a second clip for the gun, plus solvent, oil, and brushes to clean the gun. It had bothered me not being able to clean it before. If the gun failed us when we needed it, we could be killed. The new clip was a comfort too. It gave us a chance to reload fast and keep shooting. So yeah, this is when Travis says, you believe in all this Earthseed stuff, don't you? And when she says yes, he's like, but you just made it up. And she points at a stone and says, if I could analyze this and tell you what it was made of, would that mean I'd made up its contents? So what did you analyze to get Earthseed? Other people, I said, myself, everything I could read, hear, see, all the history I could learn. My father was a minister and a teacher. My stepmother ran a neighborhood school. I had a chance to see a lot. What did your father think of your idea of God? He never knew. You never had the guts to tell him. I shrugged. He's the one person in the world I worked hard not to hurt. Dead? Yes. Yeah, my parents too. People don't live long these days. And then he asks where she got her ideas. And he says, well, change isn't a god, though. It's just an idea. I smiled. Was that such a terrible criticism? It's a truth, I said. Change is ongoing. Everything changes in some way. Size, position, composition, frequency, velocity, thinking, whatever. Every living thing, every bit of matter, all the energy in the universe changes in some way. I don't claim that everything changes in every way, but everything changes in some way. And then they get talking about entropy and thermodynamics and all of this stuff, and how can God be the theory of entropy? And she essentially says that, the way that she sees it is that it's not that, and the entropy itself is God, it's more the concept of knowing that you can shape things, and that sitting there waiting for God to help you is a foolish task that puts you at a disadvantage in terms of your power over the situation, and also makes you at the mercy of this being that you've never seen or heard or whatever. And that this puts the power more in your hands, but also you could interpret it as being a lonelier situation, because a lot of people take comfort in the idea that God is watching and orchestrating things. But if you're somebody who constantly thinks, but why would God allow these things to happen? Or why isn't God helping me now? It might be more comforting to feel like you have some control than it is to wonder why God is such a douche. So I thought that this was a pretty interesting conversation. There are all kinds of changes in the universe. He shook his head. Maybe, but nobody's going to worship them. I hope not, I said. Earthseed deals with ongoing reality, not with supernatural authority figures. Worship is no good without action. With action, it's only useful if it steadies you, focuses your efforts, and eases your mind. He gave me an unhappy smile. Praying makes people feel better even when there's no action they can take, he said. I used to think that was all God was good for, to help people like my mother stand what they had to stand. That isn't what God is for, but there are times when that's what prayer is for, and there are times when that's what these verses are for. God is change, and in the end God prevails. But there's hope in understanding the nature of God, not punishing or jealous, but infinitely malleable. There's comfort in realizing that everyone and everything yields to God. There's power in knowing that God can be focused, diverted, and shaped by anyone at all. But there's no power in having strength and brains and yet waiting for God to fix things for you or take revenge for you. You know that. You knew it when you took your family and got the hell out of your boss's house. God will shape us all every day of our lives. Best to understand that and return the effort. Shape God. So, this is like I said, a really interesting conversation. And mixed in with this is the story of what was going on with Travis and Natividad. Travis and Natividad were working basically as slaves. They were room and board for a master and mistress. And the job wasn't terrible initially. But yeah, she the way that things wound up going, like, you know, the job wasn't terrible, except that they were slaves, you know, that part. But he has to ask permission to do everything. And he has to be taught how to read and all of this in secret. And he grew up with this, like, in this household. His mother was working for them first. And she, would sneak books out of the library. And, you know, sort of the mistress of the house knew, but, like, looked in the other direction so that they could go ahead. Because I think the mistress was a lot more supportive and tolerant than many could be, and they got lucky in that department. And so she becomes, the mother is a live-in cook, and she teaches him to read and write. She teaches him out of these books that she's able to, like, sneak out. And then eventually Natividad came to work for them, and he gets permission from his master to marry Natividad, which just the idea that that's still something that you have to do in this era is so crazy to me. Like, you have to ask permission to get married from somebody who basically owns you. Then my mother died, and all Natividad and I had was each other and then the baby. I was staying on as gardener handyman, but then the old bastard we worked for decided he wanted Natividad. He would try to watch when she fed the baby and couldn't let her alone. That's why we left. That's why his wife helped us leave. She gave us money. She knew it wasn't Natividad's fault, and I knew I didn't want to have to kill the guy. So we left. In slavery, when that happened, there was nothing the slaves could do about it, or nothing that wouldn't get them killed, sold, or beaten. I looked at Natividad, who sat a short distance away on spread-out sleep sacks, playing with her baby and talking to Zara. She had been lucky. Did she know? How many other people were less lucky, unable to escape the master's attentions or gain the mistress's sympathies? How far did masters and mistresses go these days towards putting less than submissive servants in their places? I still can't see change or entropy as God, Travis said. Then show me a more pervasive power than change, I said. It isn't just entropy. God is more complex than that. Human behavior alone should teach you that much. And there's still more complexity when you're dealing with several things at once, as you always are. There are all kinds of changes in the universe. So, yeah, this is a pretty... And I think I'm grasping what she's saying here. I don't feel like I've completely got it. But I am sort of clutching at the edges of it, and then it seems like it gets, like, jerked out of my fingers. But yeah, so I appreciate the fact that Lauren has been wanting to sort of convert, and I use that word in a really cautious way, because I feel like conversion has an inherently negative, like, implication to me nowadays. But she wants people who believe what she believes around her, because she believes in it so strongly that knowing everyone else had the same values as her would be really comforting. And that's, you know, also she wants to, like, start something that will change the direction of the human race. When you really get down to it, when she talks about later what the goal of Earthseed is, she's talking about, she says, you know, Earthseed is destined to continue among the stars. She's talking about, like, space travel and settling in space in other areas. That's her overall goal, and that's a huge deal. So, yeah, you're going to have to start somewhere. So this, like, rest day actually goes pretty well. They have decent food to eat, the whole thing. And she talks to him finally about, like, the destiny. And he's sort of like, he calls her, like, crazy, but does it in such a way that makes her feel like he's not dismissing it, that he's still thinking about it. The destiny of Earthseed is to take root among the stars. That's the ultimate Earthseed aim and the ultimate human change short of death. It's a destiny we'd better pursue if we hope to be anything other than smooth-skinned dinosaurs. Here today, gone tomorrow, our bones mixed with the bone and ashes of our cities. And so what? Space, he said. Mars? Beyond Mars, I said. Other star systems. Living worlds. You're crazy as hell, he said. But I like the soft, quiet way he said it, with amazement rather than ridicule. So, okay, let's get out of here because I'm halfway through this episode and I barely started to touch the other chapters. So, Zara seems to be listening on the sidelines and also starts to believe this. And as they start their walk, they're in, I think, the middle of the night, get hit with an earthquake. And this earthquake sort of changes everything. It changes the vibe of everything so far has been one of keep your head down and don't attract attention, and you will be able to make it to the other side as long as you're smart about it. The earthquake causes so much that has been a stable, safe area to drop into disarray that it transforms the landscape into a, like, sort of a region that's, like, pocketed with really vulnerable people. And so instead of these bands searching for one or two weak people that they can target, they're searching for weakened areas to target now. It's expanded the scope of what they can get and who they can bring down. So the first thing that kind of causes them to change direction a little bit is a man falls down, an old man who's got a cane falls down during this earthquake. And Lauren goes and helps him up, and he's obviously a little scared of her, but she tries to be reassuring. And as she turns around, there is another man, an older black man, smiling at her. And she is taken by his smile. And they wind up on the road seeing there's this like huge house that is on fire and heading away from it. And that man also heads away from it and sort of winds up like with their party. And he becomes a friend of the crew and eventually somebody that like Lauren's kind of falling for, even though he's at least twice her age. I think he's almost 3 times her age. But this is an interesting moment because they watch the house that's going up in flames, and Zara's trying to say that they should go and scavenge. And Lauren is like, girl, everybody is going to be heading over there, and it's going to turn into a fucking bloodbath. We do not need this. And there's nothing that we need bad enough to risk all of that. And thankfully, nobody really puts up an argument about this, and they just decide to follow Lauren's advice and continue on the road. And as they're walking away, they hear all of this gunfire. There's just, the regular gunfire of like pistols. And then eventually there's like automatic weapons fire. And Zara is like mumbling to herself that she should have known that was going to happen, because if we're as far from the main road as we are, then the people out here probably are tougher than average. And it's not going to be fucking joke to try and scavenge something. And the smoke going up draws more people from further away. So them being anywhere near this house on fire puts them directly in the path of ruthless people who are coming from all directions. The whole thing is just really, really high risk all of a sudden. And the fire, having started from this earthquake, it really makes you think about like all of the different things that could go wrong in terms of like natural disasters that could change everything in a second. And Lauren's thinking about the community, and I found this fascinating. She thinks there was much more smoke rising now, and it was rising from more than one place. Distant shouts and screams mixed with the gunfire. Stupid place to put a naked little community. They should have hidden their homes away in the mountains where few strangers would ever see them. That was something for me to keep in mind. All the people of this community could do now was take a few of their tormentors with them. Tomorrow, the survivors of this place would be on the road with scraps of their belongings on their backs. It's odd, but I don't think anyone on the road would have thought of attacking that community en masse like that if the earthquake or something had not started a fire. One small fire was the weakness that gave scavengers permission to devastate the community, which they were no doubt doing now. The shooting could scare away some, kill or wound others, and make the remainder very angry. If the people of the community chose to live in such a dangerous place, they should have set up overwhelming defenses, a line of explosive charges and incendiaries, that kind of thing. Only power that strong, that destructive, that sudden would scare attackers off and would drive them away in a panic more overwhelming than the greed and the need that had drawn them in the first place. If the people of the community were without explosives, they should have grabbed their money and their kids and run like crazy the moment they saw the horde coming. They knew the hills better than the migrating scavengers could. They should have had hiding places already prepared, or at least been able to lose themselves among the hills while the scavengers were ransacking their homes. But they had done none of this, and now vast, thick clouds of smoke rose behind us, drawing even more scavengers. I really like the idea, and I found this really fascinating that she's so thoughtful about what would have been a good way to set things up, and it is the sort of thing that, like, in concept, when she talks about, well, they should have had explosives and they should have had a place, like, built far away that they could run and hide at. It sounds so paranoid, but this is the fucking world they live in. And that's the issue that she ran into before, which is that people don't want to acknowledge the actual world they're in. And that's human nature, ain't it? Like, I hope that if Lauren is able ever to set up a community, that people will be open enough to the realities of the situation to listen to her, that she'll be in a position of enough power that she'll be able to make this sort of safeguard happen. So yeah, she's in the middle of thinking about this when the black man who she'd seen after helping that old man turns up and just says the whole world's gone crazy. And she notices that, like, he gives off the impression that he's in pretty decent shape. His clothes are, like, dirty, but he still has all the buttons on his shirt. His jeans are still, like, dark blue rather than, like, faded from the sun and everything. His walking shoes are obviously pretty expensive. The whole thing is giving the impression of somebody who's kind of in a better situation than most. So he winds up becoming part of their crew. And his name is Taylor Franklin Bankole, and decides that he tells them that he prefers to go by Bankole. So I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But it turns out that is a Yoruba name. And they sort of bond over the names that their parents chose. Hers is Olamina, and I assumed that Olamina was a Spanish name. But it's actually African, and I don't think she specifically says what country. But yeah, I thought that was pretty surprising. Olamina I took it so for granted that was Spanish. And yeah, this was Bankole was 1 year older than my father. He had been born in 1970, and he was, according to him, too damn old to be tramping along a highway with everything he owned in a couple saddlebags. He was 57. I caught myself wishing he were younger so he would live longer. And I'm just like, girl, what are you doing? Just, getting interested in somebody this much older than her seems crazy to me, but that's just not how I roll. So maybe I'm not the person to talk to about this. Or maybe it's, she lost her dad and she cared about him so much, and maybe there's a little bit of that there psychologically. But then they run into the house that collapsed. There were two women sleeping in it, and the earthquake came, and the whole house came down on top of them. And they are still alive in there, but nobody is coming to help them. And there is the possibility that this is all a huge trap, and that, people are calling for help in order to lure folks in and then going to attack and kill them or rob them or both or whatever. And it turns out that these are actual women who are trapped, and they decide to take this risk and go and help them. And the women are, like, dazed and kind of like freaked out and in shock, but not actually physically hurt too badly. One of them lost a couple teeth, and that's about all the damage that they've suffered. There's no broken bones. There's no things like that. So these women kind of wind up like becoming part of their crew as well. And their names are Allie and Jill, and they are still an unknown quantity to me. I just haven't decided yet how I feel about them and whether I trust them or not. And neither has Lauren, because later on we get to a place where they're going to be on watch and they mention that they don't have guns. And Lauren thinks to herself that she just wasn't ready for them to have a gun yet, which I think is a smart move. I don't know. I have a bad feeling about these two, and I don't have anything to hinge that on. It's just this feeling of like, they're the last to arrive. By the last to arrive, I mean the last so far. I don't know if this crew will expand more or what, but right now, and they became a part of this group, not necessarily because it was such a great match in terms of personalities, but simply because these were the only people that stopped to help them. And there are different kinds of people in the world, and their responses to being in debt to someone in that manner are all going to be very different. But there is something about the way that they react to Lauren talking about Earthseed that really gives the impression to me that they're staying with these people until they can find a better, more stable situation with someone else. And I feel like they are not as dedicated to this group as everyone else is. And I also think that they believe that they could do better on their own, just the two of them. And I don't have a lot of support for this theory so much as a suspicion of them and the way that they behave. The way that I think it's Lauren specifically, Lauren's, I think it's, I'm trying to think, the one called Jill still looked dull and shaky. Allie and I kept Jill between us. Oh, right. After they help the two of them, first of all, they get attacked. And at this point, Lauren uses a knife to defend herself. And she stabs the guy. And she says that the pain was worse than anything she had ever felt in her life. She kills him. And I guess so she stabbed him in the heart. But I'm just really surprised that more than anything that she has seen when she's, been walking around has gotten to her that badly. It just feels like I guess what it is to me, a stab in the heart. Like, yes, that can kill you. But I would think that chemical burns or rape or things like that would cause more pain. And it doesn't seem that way, or else it just didn't hit her the same way for whatever reason. So, when she gets helped up, everybody's sort of freaked out because she's covered in blood. And it's all his blood. She's totally fine. But the guy definitely did pee all over her when he died. And so she's super eager to get the hell out of her clothes. And initially she's like, all right, I really want to get out of these clothes, but that's probably not a good idea because everybody's going to be able to see that I'm a woman when I change because she's still in drag. And I don't want everyone to know that yet. But Zara is like, listen, here's like, you have the clothes that we cleaned and you do need to change just out of practicality because if people see all of that blood, they're going to think you're wounded and that's going to make them think that you're an easy target. And as she puts it, this ain't a good day to look like you got something wrong with you. So Lauren's like, oh, thank God. And she does go and change. And she thinks to herself that she would have thrown her clothes away if she could afford to do it, but she has to hold on to it so that they can wash them. We had taken about $2,500 in all from the 4 corpses, along with 2 knives we could sell or pass on to the 2 girls, and 1 gun pulled by a man Harry had shot. The gun turned out to be an empty, dirty Beretta 9mm. Its owner had no ammunition, but we can buy that, maybe from Bancole. For that, we will spend the money. I had found a few pieces of jewelry in the pocket of the man who attacked me, 2 gold rings, a necklace of polished blue stones that I thought were lapis lazuli, and a single earring which turned out to be a radio. I was just so, blown away by that. An earring that turns out to be a radio? What? So Allison and Jillian Gilchrist want to stay. They're sisters, 24 and 25, poor, running away from a life of prostitution. Their pimp was their father. The house that had fallen on them was empty when they took shelter in it the night before. And this is when she asks, "Who are you guys anyway?" And Harry says, "Earthseed." "What's Earthseed?" Jill asked, right on cue. She had let Harry direct her gaze to me. "We share some ideas," I said. "We intend to settle up north and found a community." "Where up north?" Allie demanded. Her mouth was still hurting, and I felt it more when I paid attention to her. At least her bleeding had almost stopped. "We're looking for jobs that pay salaries, and we're watching water prices. We want to settle where water isn't such a big problem." "Water's a problem everywhere," she proclaimed. Then, "What are you, some kind of cult or something?" "We believe in some of the same things," I said. She turned to stare at me with what looked like hostility. "I think religion is dog shit," she announced. "It's either phony or crazy." I shrugged. "You can travel with us or you can walk away." "But what the hell do you stand for?" she demanded. "What do you pray to?" "Ourselves," I said. "What else is there?" She turned away in disgust and then turned back. "Do we have to join your cult if we travel with you?" "No." "All right then." She turned her back and walked ahead of me as though she'd won something. I raised my voice just enough to startle and projected it at the back of her head. I said, "We risked ourselves for you today." She jumped but refused to look back. I continued, "You don't owe us anything for that. It isn't something you could buy from us. But if you travel with us and there's trouble, you stand by us, stand with us. Now will you do that or not?" Allie swung around, stiff with anger. She stopped right in front of me and stood there. I didn't stop or turn. It wasn't a time for giving away. I needed to know what her pride and anger might drive her to. How much of that apparent hostility of hers was real, and how much might be due to her pain? Was she going to be more trouble than she was worth? When she realized that I meant to walk over her if I had to, and that I would do it, she slid around me to walk beside me as though she had intended to do that all along. So this is what I mean. This kind of confrontation doesn't really get resolved. And it seems like the 2 women wind up becoming part of the group in a more sincere way. But I still have a lot of suspicions about it because it never feels like they return to this conversation. And that means that there's still something really separating them from everybody. And I just don't know how invested they are. So let's see. Late today, we reached Salinas, a small city that seemed little touched by the quake and its aftershocks. The ground's been shuddering off and on all day. Also, Salinas seemed untouched by the hordes of overeager scavengers we'd been seeing since that first burning community this morning. So they are really trying to move and keep moving. They were supposed to have another rest day, and they all kind of agree that they can't afford to do that because it really, there's a feeling in the air that there are scavengers right behind them and that they need to stay at pace to keep out of their way. And that if they spend one day resting, suddenly they're going to be in the middle of this horrible violence. And when they get to Salinas, it turns out as much as there aren't scavengers everywhere, there's a huge presence in terms of cops and private guards over the stores, to the point that the guards, some of them have machine guns mounted on tripods near the stores, and it's really discouraging them from going inside. And one of them like actually points, let's see, 2 or 3 of us walked into a store and 2 or 3 guns were trained on us. We didn't know what was going on at first. We froze, staring, waiting to see what was going to happen. The guys behind the guns laughed. One of them said, "Buy something or get the fuck out." We got out. These were little stores. There were plenty of them to choose from. Some of them turned out to have sane guards. I couldn't help wondering how many accidents the crazy guards have with those guns. I suppose that after the fact, every accident was an armed robber with obvious homicidal inclinations. The guards of the water tower seemed calm and professional. They kept their guns down and confined themselves to cursing people to speed them along. We felt safe enough not only to buy water and give our clothes a quick wash and dry, but to rent a couple of cubicles, men's and women's, and sponge ourselves off from a basin of water each. That settled the question of my sex for any of the new people who hadn't already figured it out. So, yeah, they are able to buy a good number of things that they need, including a bolt-action shotgun. She gets a book of poetry, an anthology of poetry. Harry bought a Western novel. And yeah, this shotgun is something that like is sort of a deal between Lauren and Bankole, because he says like, I don't have enough money to buy the gun, but if you buy it, I will buy like a cleaning supply and ammunition. And that's what they do, because he says, you really need a rifle for long range stuff. You've got all of these handguns, which is a really good thing to have if people jump you, don't get me wrong. But if somebody decides that you have something that they want and they have the ability to pick you off from far away, you're going to have nothing to fight back with. So I thought that was pretty interesting and something that had never occurred to me. And I'm curious to see what kind of use this shotgun gets. So let's see. Once that was settled, we left town. As we left, Harry carried the new rifle, and Zara carried the Beretta, both empty and in need of attention before we loaded them. Only Bankole and I carried fully loaded guns. I led the group, and he brought up the rear. It was getting dark. Behind us in the distance, we could hear gunfire and the dull thunder of small explosions. So they got out of town just in time, pretty much. So Lauren cleans that little earring radio. I still can't get over an earring that's a radio. That's so funny. And she listens to it and gets some news, and that news winds up really deeply changing their plans. What they had intended to do was go up through San Francisco and cross the Golden Gate Bridge and then continue north into Canada. But what they hear is that the earthquake hit San Francisco and Oakland really hard. And the place has basically become a complete free-for-all. That there are tons of scavengers that have headed there, predators just going nuts. That there's a lot of cops, but they're sort of like becoming scavengers themselves and are like extorting people, essentially. And that the National Guard has been called in to calm things down, but that it's such a huge upset that it's going to be a long time before they're able to get things back in hand. So they decide that they are going to have to move inland a little bit more. And she has these maps that, you know, they're older and there's no telling really exactly how accurate they are. But they decide that they're going to go up through the center of the state instead of along the coastline. And they need to be able to hit some small towns to resupply, but small towns are really dangerous, obviously. So they have to be sparing with how much they visit places like that. So they stop at the San Luis Reservoir and they get a lot of water. They get some really good food, actually, and are able to make like real sandwiches with grapes as a side and like tomato on the sandwiches and the sort of like luxurious items that they haven't been able to eat in a long time. And they all are like asleep. And there's one person who's still up watching. I think Zara's on watch when they're woken up by weapons fire. And they thought that they were a pretty good distance from everybody. They hardly saw anybody on the road all day. When this erupts near them, and it seems like it was a truck hijacking that went wrong. The truck is burning and eventually explodes. And the whole thing is just, huge. It's hugely jarring for them, but also really dangerous to be near because this is going to draw people. And when she looks for Bancole, she can't find him. And it turns out that he saw somebody who was hurt, this woman, and she had a toddler with her. And he stayed with her, but she died. And the toddler is still there and alive. But the woman, they have to leave. And they take the toddler in, who is, of course, missing his mom and crying. And there are people running around with guns after this hijacking who start to be drawn towards them because of his crying. And Natividad winds up nursing this toddler along with her own baby to quiet him down. And this works, actually. And the person who had been coming towards them because of the noise, they are at a disadvantage because they have this light in their eyes from the burning truck. And this crew has settled in the woods in the dark. So once they can't hear anything to lead them through anymore, they just decide to drop it, and they wind up being okay. They think about getting up and moving, but in the dead of night, trying to travel is more dangerous than just staying put and hoping for the best. So they just have to hunker down. So this baby is named Justin. There's like a bunch of documents that were on his mother when she passed away. His birth certificate, her marriage certificate. His father's dead and has been dead for a minute. And then we hear the story because Allie winds up taking this little boy under her wing. And at first she doesn't want to, but she sort of succumbs finally because he keeps coming up to her. And Jill tells Lauren about how their father beat her little boy to death, Allie's little boy. She used to have a baby. And that was what kind of turned the tide and made them go, you know what, fuck this. He got angry because the baby was crying. He beat the baby to death and then passed out drunk on the floor. And they gathered up all of their stuff and set fire to the house and left. And I really appreciate that Allie is so paranoid that he might still be alive and like coming for them, even though there is no way that he survived. And even though, even if he did survive, he was such a fucking drunk. There's no way that he's like, getting on the road and following them out here. But yeah, she says that she wakes up like covered in sweat and just completely flipped out by it. So we passed through Hollister before noon. We resupplied there, not knowing when we would see well-equipped stores again. We had already discovered that several of the small communities shown on the maps no longer existed and had not existed for years. The earthquake had done a lot of damage in Hollister, but the people hadn't gone animal. They seemed to be helping one another with repairs and looking after their own destitute. Imagine that. And that's the end of chapter 20. So, let's see. I think I'm out of time here. And I'm trying to make sure that I didn't go into chapter 20. Yeah, I didn't. Okay. So yeah, that's the end of this section. I'm just desperate to know what happens next. So I'm going to wrap this up and I'm going to start reading and then I will be back very shortly. So thank you all for being here and listening. And I'll see you soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.